That was a beautiful song. That's a Ho'oponopono song.
It is.
I love you. Please forgive me. I forgive you, and thank you. If there has ever been anything that I said or did that seemed harmful or ill-intentioned, please forgive me and thank you. And I will do the same. A few years ago, I showed a movie here called The Grace Card. If you have the opportunity to watch this movie, it's all about forgiveness. And the Grace Card is a card that you can create yourself and hand out. And I gave those out during the service. I may dust that off one of these days. A lawyer, a doctor, and a preacher were hunting. And this is the hunting season. My father was a hunter. I am not one for guns or killing anything. And I know there was a time when we had to kill what we ate. And my father killed squirrels and rabbits, and I was fine with eating squirrel and rabbit till I saw the tails hanging out of his hunting jacket. And once I saw the tails hanging out of his hunting jacket, it was all over for me eating squirrel and rabbit. He was eating the animals that I saw in our backyard, and I just thought that was terrible. But hunters and gatherers, that's what we are. And then when I was down home in Louisiana, a little town called Marion, and I saw my Aunt Georgia wring the chicken's neck, I had no more chicken for quite some time. So I've never been one for, I know things have to, things die so that we live. We die daily, as the prophet said. But this is not about hunting and killing, but I do want to start you off with this. This lawyer, this doctor, and a preacher were, during hunting season, out hunting together. And all three of them saw this buck, this big buck, just prance right in front of them, and all aimed and shot at the same time. The buck fell. But nobody knew who killed the buck. So they took it to the registration office. And the guy there said, I've seen this before. Hunters come in groups all the time, and we got to figure out who to tag this for, who gets the kill. So he says, let me ask you a few questions. He asks him a few questions, and then he begins to examine the animal. He says, okay, I know who did it. The preacher shot him. And they go, how do you know the preacher? He's not even a good shot. So how do you know he shot him? He said, see here, the bullet went in one ear and out the other. So I'm hoping today that's not the case, and I'm hoping you don't come here on Sundays just to sit here for the words to go in one ear and out the other. Last week I talked about the power of our words and the power of our thoughts. And today I'm talking about the power of forgiveness. And it's very timely with what happened yesterday in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue. And I'm sure you've read about that, heard about that on the news, where 11 congregants worshiping were killed by a gunman and 6 others wounded, including a couple of police officers. I know you remember 3 years ago when during a similar service, a prayer meeting in Charleston, South Carolina, I think it was Charlotte, North Carolina, Charleston Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. It's an African Methodist Episcopal church, and Dylan Roof, a young man, went in and had prayer with these people. They were having their prayer meeting like we have our Wednesday service. They were having their weekday service. And he went in, they prayed with him, and they embraced him, and then he took out his gun and he killed 9 of them. During the arraignment, one of the things that struck me about this whole thing was that several of the family members during the arraignment openly forgave Dylan Roof. Now that took a lot of strength and a lot of courage. And I'm sure right now there are congregants and family members who don't understand why this happened in Pittsburgh yesterday, but their hearts are open to forgive. That's what we want to talk about. I challenged you last week to watch your thoughts because they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. And watch your character, it becomes your destiny. We are not born to hate. We are born to love. That is our DNA. We learn to hate. And you may remember a few weeks ago I mentioned a book that is on Oprah's book list for this year called The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, who was on death row for 28 years for a crime that he did not commit and finally was exonerated in 2015. On death row, he decided that he had to make the best of it. So he started a book club with the other death row inmates. He witnessed many of those that he had talked to and become friends with marched over to the death chamber, and he could smell the burning bodies from his cell. He maintained his faith and believed that God is an all-loving, all-good God. God is our God, everyone's God. God allows the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike, according to Scripture. One of the men who was being executed had been a white supremacist. And just before he was executed, he was asked, did he have any last words he'd like to say? He had been a part of Anthony Ray Hinton's study group. Anthony Ray Hinton, African American, and this gentleman, Caucasian American. He said, the only thing I have to say is the people that I was taught to hate taught me how to love. See, we're not born to hate. Babies don't come out of the womb deciding, when I grow up, I'm going to be a hater. I'm going to hate everybody. I'm going to get a gun. I'm going to kill people. I'm going to say bad things about people. I'm going to do bad things. None of us do. We have to be taught to hate. During the metaphysical Bible class this morning, Steve Sanders raised the idea of the song from South Pacific. In order to hate, you have to be perfectly taught. You have to be perfectly taught by 6 or 8. In the Revealing Word, Charles Fillmore gives us a definition for forgiveness. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, writes, forgiveness really means the giving up of something. When you forgive yourself, you stop doing the things that you shouldn't do. So I venture to say that anyone who's committed any kind of an atrocity against someone else, whether it's verbal or physical, has not learned to forgive themselves for something. There's something inside of them that's crying out for love. And it's all about letting go. Letting go of that no longer serves our highest good. If we want to experience a loving, lifelong relationship, we need to be able to let go of our grievances and our hostility and our anger. So I want to talk to you about how this works. I have a few gurus that I consult. Alexa is one of them. I noticed Duke had this toy on his desk, so I decided I had to have one. And I don't ask very many questions, but I did ask Alexa the definition for forgiveness, and this is what she said. It's amazing. This little box has all the answers. The art of excusing a mistake or offense. The art of excusing. Now, that doesn't mean you condone the mistake or the offense. You forgive it. You forgive the act. And then I decided, well, maybe Alexa doesn't have all the knowledge, because you can get anything from Google. So I checked up on her by talking to her counterpart, Google. And I asked Google, what does forgiveness mean? And there were lots of instructions. Google gave me a 3-part process for forgiveness. And I'm going to share that with you in a few minutes. But before I do, I want to refer you to the book of Matthew in our textbook, the Bible, chapter 18, verses 20 through 35. And this is one of those stories that Jesus loved to tell. He loved stories, and I love stories. I love a good story, and this is one of those stories. The disciple said to Jesus, it was Peter, said, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? 7 times? 7 times 7? Well, in Jewish law, way back in the day, 7 was a huge number. Like today, we might put dollars and cents, and then it was dinar or whatever, but it was a different denomination, a different number. It may seem humongous today. It may have been $20 then, 2 million today. So the same thing with language and words. They take on a different vernacular as time goes by. And 7 was a huge number. So if I forgive my enemies, if I forgive those who do wrong things to me 7 times, that seems like a lot. I've given you 7 chances to get this right, and I'm not going to forgive you anymore. But Jesus says, no, not even 7 times 7, not even 70 times 7. What does that mean? That was a tremendous number in those days. 70 times 7 is unfathomable. How much is that? That's like me saying, I've got $2 billion in the bank. I have no idea what that looks like. You know, what does that mean? And so what Jesus was saying is, you can't count it. It's beyond measure. It's as many times as it takes to forgive. And to forgive meaning to let go of the anger, to let go of the resentment, to let go of the blame, to let go of those negative ideas you're holding onto about someone or something that has happened. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean you condone it. To let go of the power that it has over you. So Jesus tells this story. He says, let me explain this to you, because he had to break things down the way they understood it. It's a parable of the unforgiving servant. So there was this king, and one of his servants owed him a lot of money. Now today it might be the equivalent of $2 million. Imagine owing $2 million. Now since he was unable to pay, the king ordered that he and his wife and his children be sold in order to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees and begged the king, please, please spare me and spare my children and my wife. Don't make them accountable for my wrongs. Please, I'll pay you. I promise I'll pay this debt, but please don't sell us. Please let us just pay the debt. The king honored his request and forgave the debt. You owe nothing. I'm erasing your debt. Think how that felt. I had this heavy burden of owing $2 million, and now I owe nothing, and I didn't even have to do anything. He has forgiven me. I should feel really good about that. Wouldn't you feel good about that? That kind of a debt? Even if it's $10, $5 that you owe and you don't have the money, and somebody says you're forgiven, wouldn't you feel good about that? So guess what this servant does? He happens to run into somebody who owed him $20 by today's standards. He says, I want my money, and you better pay now. And the man does just like he did. He falls to his knees, he begs him, please, please, I'll pay you back. I'm going to throw you in jail. I want my money now. Please don't put me in jail. I promise I'll pay you back. Instead of listening to him, instead of reciprocating the same love that he got from the king who forgave his debt, he throws the man in jail, and he has him tortured for $20. So, some of this second servant's friends hear about it, and they go tell the king that after you did all that forgiving for him, do you know what he did? He threw this guy in jail who only owed him $20, and he's having him tortured until he can pay the debt. The king got really upset about that, and he ordered that servant to come and see him. He took away everything. He told him, you have gone against my rules. How could you not forgive him when I forgave you? And you owed a whole lot more money than he owes you. How could you do that? You see, we often do that. We forget that old saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We forget about that when it's our turn. So what does this mean for us? Do we often expect more from other people than we're willing to give? Unforgiveness, someone said, is like drinking poison and expecting another person to die. So how much are we poisoning ourselves with unforgiving thoughts? I had a personal experience years ago. I went to this weekend program called Landmark Forum. How many of you are familiar with Landmark Forum? If you're not, I suggest you Google it or ask Alexa, and they'll tell you all about it. And there's some people here who are graduates of Landmark Forum who can help you with that. It's a great opportunity. It's really an opportunity to be introspective. So the experience I had that really grabbed me was I had to make amends with everyone that I could think of that I had ever offended, that I had ever told my story to, and then kept telling my story so much till my story became bigger than life, and then I added to the story. Have you ever done this? No. Not the people here at Unity Temple on the Plaza on Sunday morning. You've never done that. But I did. And my mother-in-law knew this story. My brother knew this story. My uncle knew this story. I had this story, and it was an ongoing story. It had lots of twists and turns, and I would add to it every now and then. Oh, poor, poor, pitiful me. That was my story. Poor, poor. Do you know what happened to me? Poor, poor, pitiful me. So I had to call these people, write letters. If they were deceased, I had to write them a letter and keep it. And I had to say, please forgive me. I'm sorry. Thank you. Sometimes they didn't even know what I was talking about. They had long since forgotten it, but I hadn't. Because, see, I had drank that poison. Not them. But it was a cleansing experience. It was a healing experience. It was a releasing experience. I felt, it was hard at first, but I felt so good after I did it. I called people from the East Coast to the West Coast, North and South, who had heard my story over and over again. And many had bought into it. And there was some truth to the story. I'm not saying they're all lies, but we sort of embellish our stories, don't we? I had to forgive myself first in order to be forgiven. Forgiveness is hard work. It's really hard work, especially forgiving ourselves. How many times do we beat ourselves up for something that's in the past that we did that we can't go back and fix? We beat ourselves to death. When all we need to do is say, I'm sorry. I forgive me. It takes a conscious effort. It has to come from the heart, and it takes consistent practice. In the book of Luke, the 23rd through the 34th verses, we read, as Jesus is facing death on the cross. And he looks out among all those who are cheering on this execution, some people that he had helped along the way. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When you've been hurt, do you find it difficult to forgive? I do. See, when I stand here on this platform, I'm actually reading my mail, and I'm just allowing you all to eavesdrop. So Google told me the 3-part process for forgiveness is, first of all, make the choice. Forgiveness is a choice. So when I went through Landmark Forum, I didn't want to do it at first. I thought, this is hokey. How am I going to call all these people and tell them, forgive me for my story and this and that. But I had to make that choice if I was going to make a change. So I made the choice. And I had to first choose to remember that God had forgiven me long before I even decided I could forgive myself. So every day I have to make a choice, every day, even today, to shed the old, whatever old means for you and for me, every day. The second thing is forgiveness starts with prayer. And Paul said we should pray without ceasing. So every prayer should be a prayer of forgiveness. Forgiveness for ourselves, forgiveness for each other. When you forgive someone else, you free your own soul. It's really not about them. It's about you. And the third thing is forgiveness has to be final. You got to let it go. Now, I have a tendency to get my mind wrapped around something, and it's like a broken record, and I just can't let it go. You ever have that? I know I need to let it go, but I just can't let it go. So I have to remember that if I'm truly going to forgive myself, I got to let it go. Let it go. If I'm going to forgive you, I got to let it go. You remember those pots and pans where set it and forget it? Remember that commercial? You know, how many of you bought one of those? You just set it and forget it, right? Some of you may remember that. Well, that's the way it is with forgiveness. You got to set it and then forget it. So when you've truly forgiven someone, you're happy when good things happen to them. You're happy. You have no ill feelings toward them. You know when you haven't forgiven because anytime you hear that person's name, the hair stands up on the back of your neck. You start reliving all the things that you remember that happened with that person. You don't think anything good should ever happen for them because they don't deserve it. But when you've forgiven, you want the best for them. You want what's good for them because you know that they have the same God you do. God is in charge and all good and all loving. Confucius said, to be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it. I like that. So we can let go of relationships that no longer serve us. We can let go of hurt, fear from the past, mistakes, guilt, slander, anger, failures, worry, but it's easier said than done. The easy way to do it is to always remind yourself that there is a higher power, greater than you, in charge of it all. And that power lives in you. You have that power within you to rise above any circumstance. There is one presence and one power active in our lives and in the universe, God the good, omnipotent. So if you want to experience loving and lifelong relationships, let go of the grievances and hostilities from the past that are holding you back. So when you think about forgive, what does that mean? Forgive. For hurt, give love. For anger, give peace. For discontentment, give joy. For anxiety, give patience. For confusion, give understanding. Forgive. So in this time of ugly words and mean actions that we witness on a daily basis, how can we forgive? When the disciples asked Jesus, how do we pray? Teach us how to pray. The two lines in that were more of a command. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. Command myself to forgive the way I wish to be forgiven. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who said, hatred cannot drive away hatred. Only love can do that. For hatred, give love. Darkness cannot drive away darkness. Only light can do that. For darkness, give light. Forgive. Are you willing? You have to create forgiveness. It comes from the inside out. Paul said, I haven't mastered this by any means. I venture to say that none of us have, but as he says, brothers and sisters, I do not consider that I have made it. But one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining to move forward, I press on to reach the goal of the Christ in me, the higher power. Somebody wrote, Daphne Rose Kingma, I like this. Holding on is believing there's only a past. Letting go knows there's a future. Someone else said it takes more strength to let go than it does to hold on. You think you're holding on to the end of your rope and you're shaking, trying to hold that rope. It takes more strength for you to let go, more strength of consciousness to let go of that which no longer serves your higher good. So the key is to let God have it. My mother would say, take your burdens to the Lord and leave them there. Let it go. She also says the Lord will fight your battles if you just keep still. She says, let it go. Will Rogers said, "Don't let yesterday take up too much of today." When we're holding on to yesterday, we cannot possibly move forward. We cannot possibly move forward. And isn't it funny how forgiveness can bring such joy? It's a gift. One of the Fillmore's favorite writers and thinkers was Ralph Waldo Emerson. In fact, Rickard Fillmore is named Rickard Waldo Fillmore after Emerson. And it was Emerson who said, "Forgiveness is the fragrance the violet leaves on the hill that has crushed it." So look how sweet that is, to forgive and be forgiven. So I want to leave you with this. I came across this by John Patrick Kinney. And I want you to think about this in terms of how do we forgive, and how can you leave here today with this attitude of forgiveness, no matter what happens. Someone cuts you off in traffic, you get into an argument with a friend or a spouse, a disagreement over whatever. You have a little financial challenge or something else going on in your life, that you can still ask to be forgiven. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. He writes, "The cold within. 6 humans trapped by happenstance in dark and bitter cold, each possessed a stick of wood, or so the story is told. Their dying fire in need of logs, but the first one held hers back. For of the faces around the fire, she noticed one was black. The next one looked across the way, saw one not of his church, and could not bring himself to give the fire his stick of birch. The third one sat in tattered clothes. He gave his coat a hitch. Why should his log be put to use to warm the idle rich? The rich man just sat back and thought of wealth he had in store, and keeping all that he had earned from the lazy, shiftless poor. And the last man of this forlorn group did not accept for gain, giving just to those who gave, was how he played the game. Their sticks held tight in death's stilled hands was proof enough of sin. They did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold within." When we are unforgiving, there is a cold within us. And we have to be the ones to warm our own fire before we can light the fire for someone else. Forgive yourself, and you'll find it easier to forgive others. Forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness sets me free. As we move into meditation, I invite you to recite that for me. Forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness sets me free.